So in my last video I showed you how China is using currency manipulation to gain an advantage in trade. And a lot of you are asking, well, why don't we all do this? Why don't other countries use trade manipulation? But what if I told you they do? I've come to Rotterdam to explain. Now, a lot of countries have used trade manipulation in order to develop in their earlier years, and the Netherlands is no exception. They historically have used protectionism and tariffs being taxed on imports, in order to protect domestic industries and allow them to develop. And in fact, what I'm stood on now is actually kind of a huge vacuum cleaner for trade. It was invented to move grain between ships to make the port here in Rotterdam more efficient. And trade manipulation continues to happen today in developed economies. We see the EU imposing a range of external tariffs on other countries in order to protect the members of the EU. Now, what we do have to be aware of is there is some differences in protectionism. Some forms of protectionism are more accepted, whereas other forms are more extreme. So, for example, if the EU put a tariff or a tax on imported Chinese steel because they feel the Chinese are dumping, that is, they're selling excess supplies of steel, they're heavily subsidizing the Chinese steel market in order to undercut Western and international competition to have an unfair advantage, well, then it could be justified to use a tariff in that situation. And in fact, the rules around trading and tariffs are laid out in a document that's called GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. And that was set out by the WTO, the World Trade Organization. Now, that's a bit different from using currency manipulation in order to seek an advantage in trade, because currency manipulation comes with a range of costs, and currency manipulation is far more interventionist than, say, putting a tax on something. The first thing to bear in mind is that if you're deliberately keeping your currency undervalued, that's going to make imports, or the goods that you buy from abroad, more expensive. And that's a major trade-off, because, for example, if you want to import goods that you need, necessity goods, that's going to cause a major problem because those goods are going to be more expensive. Let's take, for example, capital-intensive goods like tractors or agricultural equipment. They're made exclusively in predominantly Germany. Or, for example, if you want an MRI machine, well, you're going to be buying that from America because General Electric have kind of a monopoly on that market. So in those situations where you're undervaluing your currency, it's going to be far more expensive for you to buy and import those goods from abroad. And that can hamper your development. So whilst you may see your domestic industries increase, you may see employment in those industries increase, the downside would be actually lower development standards because of the lack of imported necessity goods. Now, China has somewhat of an exception to this because they're able, obviously, to produce a lot of goods on their own, and also they have a vast agricultural production. So the goods that they need to be importing are kind of fewer than in other countries. And that also explains why other countries don't use currency manipulation. But moreover from that, you also need to be in a trade surplus. You need to be exporting more than you're importing already in order to benefit from currency manipulation. And quite simply, most countries aren't in a trade surplus, they're in a trade deficit. So in effect, in order to use currency manipulation, you would have to justify the trade-off of inflation. You've also got to consider the opportunity cost of keeping those foreign currency reserves in order to manipulate the exchange rates. And also you run the risk of becoming a bit of a pariah within the trading environment. If other countries are using floating exchange rates and you come in and deliberately manipulate your exchange rate to have an advantage, well, they're not going to be too happy with that. And that could lead to retaliatory protectionism. So, for example, tit-for-tat tariffs. Now, China can get away with this because obviously we're very reliant on trade with China, so we can't throw up too much of a stink. Although even in that situation, with that reliance, we have seen increasing questions being asked around Chinese trading practices. But also bear in mind, I'm not just singling out China. There's a range of countries that employ these practices. I just think it's an interesting topic for discussion. But let me know in the comments down below, guys, what do you think? Do you think your country should be using more trade protectionism? And if so, why? If you enjoyed the video, then give it a like, and I'll see you all in another video.